Welcome to FM Thoughts, a podcast about Football Manager thoughts and related thoughts. I am JMThoughts. That's a lot of thoughts in the first 10 seconds. And today I am joined by FM community member Lockeis. Welcome.
Yeah, thanks JM. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to chatting about FM.
Yeah, well, you are a very interesting chap. You are a consumer of FM content in terms of I see you around in various Twitch chats and other spaces. But also you're not really a particular expert on the game, are you?
No, not at all. So I grew up kind of playing FM Touch on my iPad, and then when my iPad eventually died, kind of forgot about the game for a couple of years, and then ended up finding the FM community kind of like early last year, just through YouTube on a recommended video. I think it was like Work the Space or The Lujo, one of the bigger channels, and then kind of got roped into FM Llama, and then into the Twitch community and the Discord community from there.
Fantastic, and Llama is a good route in. Your passion really is about injuries in video games, and we're definitely going to talk about that. But I am kind of always interested to get different perspectives on Football Manager. So as someone who played a little bit of Touch in the past and maybe have tried the fuller version of the game more recently, what's your kind of experience of Football Manager then? Did you find it intuitive? Did you find it daunting?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one. So I downloaded FM23 at the end of last cycle when it was on the Steam sale, and booted it up, and it was really strange. It was like kind of walking down a street that you used to live on, in terms of I recognised all the buttons, I recognised like the contract section and the training section, but it definitely has updated a lot since I last played it, and also I was playing the more basic Touch version. And I think the most interesting bit to me was how much data management and like data solutions there are now through the data hub. So when I was lucky enough to work with the manager seat and work with the llama himself on the video, being able to look at all that data was such an interesting perspective as somebody who kind of does spend all day in that environment.
Was that something you were then familiar with? If you're used to working with data, did you look at it and recognize this as looking like legitimate stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from my perspective, you could really use FM now almost as a teaching tool for people who don't necessarily benefit from being in a classroom environment, but who have an interest in sport and who understand sport and who want to get involved in sport. Looking at the way that FM now presents its data analytics and the idea of attribute comparisons and actually giving context to numbers and looking at the different numbers and understanding what those numbers mean and being able to make conclusions from those numbers is a huge skill that I think you can now learn through a game like Football Manager.
You're talking about your familiarity with data. For the listeners, do you want to give a little bit of your story, a little bit of kind of where you're coming at this from?
Yeah, can do. So I'm currently a PhD student at Kingston University. I also have set up a social enterprise style project with a colleague of mine called Freya, called the E-Concussion Project, which is really focused on introducing concussion style language and concussion style behaviors into video games. So yeah, I'm fairly familiar with data, but I also really enjoy teaching. And that's kind of the perspective that I was coming at that from, is looking at Football Manager in the state it is now as more than just a game for people to have fun with. It absolutely is, but I also think it has the potential to be really beneficial on a wider level to potentially those people who are afraid of numbers, or who didn't benefit from a classroom setting and who actually want to come and engage with that style of being able to generate data conclusions.
And that is, I mean, that's something I do in my job as well. Like it is a really valuable skill in the kind of modern employment. I've never quite thought of FM in that way, so that's a really interesting perspective. That yeah, it is a great sandbox for trying to draw conclusions and testing things, isn't it?
Yeah, and also kind of looking at the more wider stuff, learning that visas do exist and work permits exist, and introducing concepts to people who may just be starting their career or may even be kind of a step before that, and are looking at things like, actually, let's say if I want to move to a different country, well, I've now learned that I need a work permit, and you can go away and do your own research on the work permit, but it can be FM that almost initiates that thought process. So I think there's a lot of a wider scope than a fantastic game that people like to play and I like to watch.
That's very fair. I mean, the thing that I often think about with Football Manager is in relation to some of the stuff around budgeting. You know, you don't go into huge details in the game, but you do have to make those kinds of trade-offs between what's the longer-term decision, what's the short-term decision. Are you going for instant results? Are you going for longer results? How much do you stick with the strategy? That's all really relevant in my job and even in daily life, right? Like, do you make the investment in something that's going to help you but isn't going to immediately, but isn't going to last as long? Can you be pragmatic about what you can afford? Replacing a player on Football Manager, I guess it has life similarities, like maybe buying a car. Do you go for a second-hand older car that might be cheaper but does the job now but might break? Do you go for, but you'd love a Rolls Royce but you can't afford it? You can't afford Erling Haaland. Cars don't tend to appreciate in value and develop as young players do, but you can take bits of it. Yeah, you can really take little bits of it, can't you? Yeah, it teaches core skills.
Yeah, and I think for example, didn't thrive in a classroom setting, and the ability to have a game that I would actually actively enjoy playing, that kind of teaches me how to give context to things as well, I think, because it almost goes a step deeper than here are two numbers that are different. It actually asks you, for example, if you're comparing heading attributes, well, actually this player's got better heading attributes than this player, but this player is taller, therefore what's my conclusion? And whilst in FM people can make different conclusions, but the fact that they're using evidence to drive their decision making, I think from my perspective as somebody looking at it, is really exciting to see, and as a potential tool to kind of take it further than what it is. I mean, if you imagine if you were teaching kind of a classroom of people and you put two players up on a whiteboard, if you were doing like an FM math session, and you say, okay, what are the different numbers here? Or when you've got the spider diagrams up, okay, what are we actually seeing in those graphs? And just adding extra context to those bits and pieces.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, when you're presented with data in real life, gosh, this is becoming very, very relevant to me. I was supposed to be interviewing you, but when we're evaluating things in my job, sometimes people are saying, well, what's the obvious conclusion? What's working? What's not working? And it's like, there's actually, the more data you gather, sometimes that doesn't give you a more obvious answer. It really does depend how you interpret it and what your outcomes and your objectives are and what you're trying to achieve. And you can, with all these things, you can come to different conclusions, but it's how you're using that data and testing it, and what other references can you use to say whether this player is going to be a better fit for this position or whatever. I think Football Manager I think it can be a really good teaching tool for that kind of thing. That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, don't get me wrong, obviously I'm talking about the more kind of serious bits of the game, but I also think one thing that I've learned from Football Manager is that there's a very positive, healthy community behind it as well, which is obviously a whole different side of it. I mean, obviously me and you have talked a little bit through streams in the past, and there's also that side of the game where people like me who might not necessarily play the game every day can still join in a community and interact with people.
Absolutely, and that's why one of the reasons it's a real pleasure to have you on the podcast. You have mentioned, you obviously, from what you're saying, you believe in the kind of the positive influence that video games can have. Is that partly what's underpinning the E-Concussion Project? Where has that originated from?
Yeah, absolutely. So the origin story, I suppose, all started on Twitter, well, now X, where I just put a tweet out and got chatting to Freya through it. And so my background to kind of pay rent, I suppose. Before doing my PhD, was as a researcher in an early stage biotech company. So looking at primarily medical data and making conclusions, which is kind of why I guess I've spoken about data so much. It's kind of just what I ended up knowing. But I realized that through also being a very active video game player, I play a lot of EAFC games, a lot of cricket games, a lot of rugby games. One thing that I noticed was that despite how prevalent concussion is in the news and how prevalent concussion is in the everyday real world sport, it's not being reflected in video games. And luckily, me and Freya got chatting. Freya's doing her PhD in concussion, and we kind of came up with this project. And we've been lucky enough to secure a bit of funding from the Western Burt Association, and that enabled us to do our first project, which was focusing primarily on understanding the scope of the issue. So we studied EAFC, Rugby League Challenge 4, I think the game's called. I can never get the title right. And Rugby 22. First of all, just to understand whether or not head impacts happened in video games, and then secondly, how those video games reacted to head impacts in the game.
I remember when we first started speaking about this, one of the questions you're asking is, is this how does it compare in Football Manager? And I've always kind of kept my eye open for head injuries, and I think I can't think of an occasion where a player's come off with immediately being taken off or sidelined for a head injury in Football Manager. I think I've seen it as an injury, but I'm not sure, which I guess is kind of your point. I'm not sure it's as prevalent as I would expect, or it's given enough of a uniqueness that obviously we've seen legally in the game of football, soccer, that the rules around how players are treated with head injuries has changed over time. For a game that's so focused on realism, I couldn't tell you whether that's accurately reflected or not in Football Manager.
Yeah, and that's kind of where the stem of the projects really come into. So Football Manager wasn't included in the games we studied purely because we wanted to have a look at open gameplay. But there is definitely scope to look at Football Manager. And listen, I've been in enough streams kind of by now, and I've not seen concussion come up in any of the streams I've watched. And again, like you said, I've not seen plays being removed from the game due to a head impact. I mean, obviously in the real world, when a player has some form of head injury, all the game gets stopped, medical staff come on, and then players are assessed whether or not they can continue or not. And what I would like to see is not a case of I think head impacts are banned. I think headers should be banned. That's not something that I have an opinion on. My opinion is actually getting real world practices reflected into the video games, just purely to normalize behaviors and normalize that it is okay for players to go off injured if they have received a head impact, and open up the conversation with people who might not necessarily watch football all the time or play football all the time, but do engage with Football Manager a lot or do engage with cricket games a lot, and that's the perspective that we're really coming at.
Yeah, I mean, I was playing Football Manager at lunch while I was eating my beans and toast at home. Living the high life. And I had a player that went off immediately with a red injury, and it was like a bruised foot in the end. And it made me think of this conversation because I knew we were going to talk about that, about head injuries and how there are injuries in the game which almost replicate that head injury, where sometimes you say, actually as a precaution this player is coming off, even though we expect them probably to be fine the next day, but actually the safest thing is to take them off now. But as you say, all the streams I've watched, all the games I've played, I can't think, and I guess if people are listening to this and they think, yes, I've seen this, then tweet Lockeis, I guess. But yeah, I can't think of that happening with head injuries, and if it's not, then it isn't reflective of real life, and it's maybe, as you say, not reinforcing the positive things that we want to reinforce about taking these seriously.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other stage of the E-Concussion Project, now that we've identified that there is a real problem, is making sure that concussion and head injuries as a whole are reflected properly in the game. So I had a very genuine question, which is, well, why can't a game developer just go away and introduce this into their games tomorrow? And the answer is they probably could. But from our perspective, we would rather that the mechanisms of which it's introduced and the realism are reflecting the messages that should be out in the wider community, and really have messages that benefit the awareness rather than enforcing potential stigmas about going off for an injury, or I guess the worst case scenario would be like reinforcing misinformation.
What makes head injuries such an important issue, and what makes that the thing that you're focusing on?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. My purpose for this is not to make concussion more important than other injuries. Instead, I'm looking at it in the case of I would like to see concussion reach a level playing field as other injuries. For example, when you go on social media and a player's gone off for a broken leg, you don't see fans talking negatively about him on social media, or her on social media, sorry. But when a player goes off for a head injury, that there's obviously like some negative connotations about that, and I'm pretty sure if you kind of went on social media, you could find hundreds of examples. And I think that's due to a barrier or a lack of understanding about, first of all, what a concussion is, and secondly, that a player will have negative long-term health impacts if they continue to play through a concussion or have a secondary concussion. So it's really just looking to raise the level playing field to a point where it's normalized.
I mean, there is that old school mentality, particularly in the English game. I think of the best word I suppose is man up. You know, it's you just get on with it. You throw them back on the pitch, they carry on. And I guess that medical background, we're beginning to really the evidence really is that is a bad idea, isn't it?
Yeah, no, 100%. I mean, if anybody is listening to the podcast who ever has a head injury, the best thing to do is to bring yourself off the field and go to your GP and get checked out properly. The whole idea of I need to keep playing, or people are gonna say stuff. People might say stuff, but it's more important to look after your long-term health. I'm not a concussion expert, but I would always say after a head injury, take the player off at any level.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and I guess it's. Do you think that the general culture around sport of a sort of you hear a lot, particularly in football, of players being told they're not as hard as they used to be, and they're always diving, and they're being wrapped in cotton wool and all of this. Do you think that feels like it's part of the fan culture, maybe to kind of harken back to a better version of football? But I don't think it's probably not a helpful cultural thing in the context of this conversation, is it really?
Yeah, I think it's all to do with normalization. I think one of the biggest changes that have happened in sport, I would say, is the development of understanding actually that injuries do have long-term impacts. And I think there's almost been such a vast increase in knowledge, whether in the form of sports therapy, in terms of psychological understanding, that it's almost accelerated past the point that people are being kept up to date with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So it's almost like everything else has surpassed it in that room.
Yeah, and now there's a need to bring the fans back into the conversation, and there's a need to bring like the actual players back into the conversation, almost saying this is what we've learned, and take steps to actively engage with fan groups, engage with coaches, just to tell people that it is okay to be injured, and here are the benefits to your player going off. I think whether your thing is to do with player welfare and you want to see players obviously being fitter for longer, or whether your thing is purely I want to see my best player playing at his highest level, either way, the best way to do that is to make sure players are healthy. And we think from the E-Concussion Project's perspective, we think that opening that kind of communication with fans about concussion and about taking players off is part of that process of actually re-engaging fans into the idea of taking players off if they are injured or after a head injury.
And so what have you done so far? You've done this audit of, or kind of done a bit of research into these 3 case studies. what are the next steps for the project?
Yeah, so I'm actually in a lucky position that me and Freya are going to present our research at the International Olympic Committee's Injury Prevention Conference in Monaco at the back end of February into early March. And then from that perspective, if all goes well from there, we'll be looking to raise some more money and actually establish some connections with governing bodies to really help propel this research further. And the next bit of research, like I've kind of already alluded to, is talking to medical stakeholders and club stakeholders about what the right messaging needs to be, but also talking to people like yourself and other members of the FM community about what they think their role is if they're streamers, and helping kind of raise awareness, and whether that's something that is thought about, but also talking to players about their experience of players' injuries, and working out the messaging. We don't want people to be scared of concussion, but how do we raise awareness? And that's the next kind of little period. We are really hoping it starts a more open conversation about concussion. I think most exciting bit for us is actually seeing what other people think of it, and we're really looking forward to the conference. And I get to go and watch Monaco play football.
I mean, usually I put this at the end, but it feels like this is a perfect kind of place to say, like, if people are interested, what's the best way of them following along with the project?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my Twitter's not dedicated to the E-Concussion Project by any extent, but I do tweet about it on there. I'll happily ask people my email if they drop me a DM on Twitter. We have got an introductory slide deck that we're happy to share with anybody, just to introduce ourselves a little bit further. And we do post on LinkedIn as well. We don't have a dedicated channel for this yet. But yeah, like through the socials, through email, we're always happy to talk to anybody and have productive conversations, because what we've realized is we learn a lot from anybody, no matter what their background is. Everybody's got an experience or a story, and that helps us kind of build the project.
Fantastic. So you've mentioned there that you might be partaking in a little bit of European football while you're over there. What are your kind of interests outside of the project? Usually I would ask you, what's your football manager save, or where you might be going in future with anything of that regard. Do you have anything that you're really passionate about outside of the project at the moment?
Oh, in terms of FM, I would love to build up TNS, the team in Wales. I went to both of their home Champions League ties last season. Well, this season, I suppose, last year. And I would love to get into a proper save of building TNS into a Champions League team, or further into a Champions League team. Don't get me wrong, a massive challenge, and it's not something that I'm going to do on my first save. I think for my first save, it's going to be managing one of the big clubs, just to get used to all the mechanisms. But yeah, that would be the ultimate goal.
Anyone who's managed in Wales, TNS is not popular, as you may have seen from FM Llama's videos, but it is sometimes good to start with the team that's got a little bit more resource when you are trying to build a nation from very low down. That sounds like a fun challenge.
It's going to be a long one.
Just don't let FM overtake the PhD in terms of best use of your time, I guess.
No, listen, I mean, I think the thing that I'm kind of most grateful for is being able to talk to people like you through the FM community, and things like that. I think provide balance to when you are kind of working a full-time job. Being able to watch a stream with people you enjoy hanging out with, I think kind of makes the game all that more in depth.
Absolutely. And if you are listening to this is really like a call from me. If you see stuff around concussion in the game, like, just take a note of it, maybe tweet it, or just kind of think about what that might mean, what that might be saying, because I think this is going to be a really interesting thing to look at moving forward. Really, is this going to change? Hopefully your project's going to have an impact, and yeah, it does feel important. If I hadn't have run into you and had this conversation, I'm not sure I would have given it as much a thought around. Yeah, you hear that it's important, you hear the debate around heading the ball or whatever else, but yeah, the game that I sink out hundreds of hours into every year, I I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how much it reinforces that idea or reflects that. So, really, really, really important and interesting stuff.
Yeah, and people who are listening, please don't think it will ruin the project if they tweet me stuff. It will actually kind of build the idea that it is in games, and that's a positive and should be celebrated. So it's not going to do me any harm if I do see people tweeting concussion-related things at me. I'm all for it. And it's always good to have the interaction.
It's not about proving that there's not there or point scoring, is it? It's about like, hey, if it turns out Football Manager is implementing it really well, or they implement it really well in future, that would be a great case study, right, to then go to other organisations with.
Yeah, exactly, 100%.
Well, I think we are just about time, unless you've got anything that you're burning to get off your chest at the moment.
No, just a massive thank you for having me and letting me talk about the E-Concussion Project. It is something that me and Freya are both really passionate about, so it's always fantastic to talk to people about it. So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Thank you for coming on, and for being. We've talked about this for a long time, and kind of feeling when the time was right to have a conversation about it. And maybe in a year or two we come back and see if anything's changed or shifted or whatever. But for now, thank you so much, Lockeis.
No, really enjoyed it. Thanks, JM.
No worries. And if people do want to find your Twitter, do you want to remind us one more time what that is?
It is at Isaac_Lockett.
There you go. Thank you very much. Go check that out, and until next time, thank you very much. This type of interview is exactly why I started the podcast, to be able to hear from a member of the FM community like Lockeis, who has got such an interesting story to tell and such an interesting way of thinking about Football Manager. So I'm really thankful to him for coming on the podcast. You might be able to tell that this was recorded a little while ago. You have to know that Lockeis and his colleague Freya had a great time at the conference. It went really well, and the project is developing, so there's lots of things I've put in the links if you want to find out more about this. But it also felt like it was a good time to release this podcast. You might have seen a couple of weeks ago there was something about Edison, who took a really serious blow on the pitch. Manchester City's goalkeeper wasn't actually taken off when he probably should have been for the concussion. Really underplayed how serious that concussion was. So it does go to show how this is really relevant and really important, and definitely feels like Football Manager's influence can be used in a positive way, that this project is really relevant. So super happy to have Lockeis on, and I hope that if you've listened to this, you take that on board and do help support this cause, because it's a really relevant thing. But we are at the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for listening. As always, sharing it, rating it, liking it, all the things that you do with podcasts is hugely helpful. If you enjoyed this episode, maybe you're new, is Football Manager an esport? Is probably another episode similarly to this, where you can kind of rethink how you think about the game. But otherwise, we are here every week at the moment during season 2. We'll be back next week with another interview. And there's nothing left for me to say other than thank you so much for listening. I hope you have a wonderful start to the week, and hopefully you'll be hearing from me soon. And if you want to message me, feel free. It's at JMThoughts on Twitter. I think it's actually at JMThoughtsFM on Twitter. But otherwise, there's nothing left for me to say other than go well, friends. Have a great start to the week. Or end to the week. I don't know when you're listening. Bye!